taking anybody's side, I've got a question to the affirmative team. Well, in our experience of trying to use OER, there have been times where, for example, you see some stuff that you'd like to use, but probably you don't, because it's a bit on your argument, your point on ease of use. It's not always maybe easily downloadable. It takes time to load, for example, because of our bandwidth connection, first of all. I'm talking mainly about things like video, screencast, and so on. And I think it can't be generalized that all OERs we have at ease of use. Because there are things that, for example, if there is a screencast of using softwares, you can find plenty of them on the net, but they're not always of good quality. The sound may not be good. And so if you have the equipment and you've got the technologies to do it, you might as well do it because you know how to use it, but you're actually try not to waste time to get things, but by trying to look for them, it takes as much time as maybe you would sit down and just do it yourself. That's just a comment, but maybe you've got an answer for me.
Of course.
The comparison I would make is very simple. If you go back 1,000 years to when the first books were being created, they were created by, copied by monks. They were in Latin. They took many years to create a book because they were hand done. The cost of a book, even when they began to publish in mainland Europe, in the first printing press, the first books came out were the equivalent of 3 years' salary for the average person. So books were really, really rare, difficult to use, very elitist, very exclusive, only for certain people. And that's why they maintained a monopoly of knowledge, because only certain people could read them and translate them. We, this week, have been discussing OER, Open Educational Resources, which is a cutting-edge issue in education just now. We're at the stage of just beginning to put our feet forward. No one says it's going to be easy. If it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. We've already won the point because the opposition team are already considering that some OER are good, but only the ones that they define are good. We've already come away from the position of good and bad to they're all good, just different shades of good. So what I draw from that as an educationalist, as a scientist, is that we have to identify what are the problematic issues and explore them in more detail. And the problematic issues are, how do we ensure that people get greater access for these things? How do we label them? How do we make them available? How do we get some accurate measure of cost and benefit? How do we improve access for these things, not just for higher education, which we're really focused on this week, but right down through the chain to further education, secondary education, primary education, kindergarten even. And I think it's quite significant that if you compare my first analogy of the first production of books and the liberation of knowledge that was by being able to read ideas and be stimulated by ideas, even if you didn't know who wrote the book. Even if the person who wrote the book was not within 1,000 miles of you, you could get these ideas. That's the stage we're at with OERs just now. That you can benefit from the inspiration, the insight, the hard work by people deliberately creating small little bits of material that can be used in education and voluntarily, selflessly giving that into the community to say, here you are, if you can make use of this, do so. And the challenge now is to pick that up and try to see how we can fine-tune that to eliminate some of the doubts that we all have about how best to do this in the short term.
Thank you very much, Frank. Would someone else like to respond to this? Any responses from anyone, both on the teams and in the audience? There was a lot in that. There was a whole lot in that. Oh, here we go.
I think just two things. One is about this ease of creation thing. I think Doc's absolutely right. It's the things. Frank's analogy kind of breaks down because books aren't that the online stuff isn't hard to create. The kind of threshold to creation has collapsed. That's why everyone is creating these kind of clips and things. And so that makes the point of reusing kind of disappears in a way because it's so easy to create yourself. You may as well just create from scratch and get the thing you want. And just come on, they're doing that thing again of trying to claim everything's an OER. It's like back in the turn of the century, so around 2000, with this big thing about what were learning objects. Every conference I went to spent hours trying to define what is a learning object, and we never got a conclusion. And it's the same thing true for OER. So is a link an OER? Is a tweet on Twitter an OER? And if so, then it's hard to argue that they're not great because that's everything in the entire world. So I was trying to focus on very specifically how we define OERs in the OER movement, which are kind of parts of these projects like MIT and OpenLearn. But if you're going to have everything under the sun that you're saying is an OER, then okay, well, that would include a digital book, I guess, and everything. So it's hard to argue against that, I guess.
Yes, I have a comment. First of all, I think the affirmative team is trying to influence the jury, even after the debate. So just to come back on the issue of this elitist approach using OER, if we look at the statistics of internet penetration in Africa alone, using OER, if we look at the statistics of internet penetration in Africa alone, which is horrible, so then we can ask ourselves the questions, especially where Africa, where most of the poorest countries of the world are found over there, some of the poorest countries, for whom are we creating these OERs? Who are going to access it in reality, if not the elitist component in all countries where the access is available? So I think this is a point of further reflection for the team over here. Thank you.
And further to that, what I've found is that a lot of OERs are in closed formats. So they use proprietary software like Microsoft Word and so on. So people still, if you are in a poor nation and you don't have the funds to really install Microsoft Office and you're into Open Office, you cannot access those resources because they're closed. And the mere fact they're being created by proprietary software. So that's something we need to consider.
Thank you very much.
Let's get real. This is the real world. You can also quote the facts that the literacy rate for the average population is lower in Africa than anywhere else on the planet. You can also say that the smallest percentage of written down languages is in Africa rather than anywhere else on the planet. Does that mean that we shouldn't give books to Africa? That we shouldn't encourage reading as an educational course? Because it's only available to certain people and you have to buy books? Horror of horror. They put them in places where you have to go to get them. The argument that you're making is sound in some aspects, but it's picking away at the edges. You're, as we say, fiddling while Rome burns. You're so absorbed in the issues of the little bits of things that might go wrong and theoretically are possible that you miss the huge elephant in the room, which means that if we are looking for ways and things to educate people with, surely things that are available, that are of good quality, that we can find right across the board, that are available to us, I would suggest digitally, because you can manipulate them much more easily in a variety of ways, are things that should be grabbed with both hands, and not to say, well, perhaps they can't get access to computers, perhaps they don't understand what they're doing. There is lots of research and lots of projects that show that when you turn these things over to people, the results are beyond your wildest expectations because they're not predictable. And people find ways to use these things and reuse them in ways that really would surprise you. So my feeling is go with the flow, open up these gates, and try to encourage as much as possible, and really encourage training and a new literacy in how to use these things, rather than complaining about people who don't know what they're doing.